Hello and welcome everyone to our 2021 State of the Title Industry Roundtable. I'm really excited for today's presentation. We have three incredible title industry experts with us here today. But before I get into introductions and before I get to the content of today's webinar, I want to do some quick housekeeping with you all. If you haven't had a chance to download our 2021 report yet, there is a handout section in your control panel where you can do that now if you'd like. I also will be sending out a follow-up email with the link to the report, as well as the recording of today's session for you to view later if you like. And I will also have some other free resources within that email that will hopefully be helpful for you as you are planning for 2022. We'll also have some time at the end for questions from the audience. So within your control panel, you should also see a questions section where you can put in your questions at any time that you like, and we will get to those towards the end of today's session. So before we get into things, for those of you who are new to PropLogix, maybe aren't aware of what PropLogix is, I just wanted to do a quick introduction. We are a title support service company, and we provide things like title searches, municipal lien searches, estoppel, HOA demand letters, release tracking, and many other services to help you with your title operations. Our services are integrated with some of the most popular title production software out there, and we've been doing this for about 10 years and started in the state of Florida, but now we offer these services nationwide. So if you want to learn more, I encourage you all to head over to proplogix.com, check out our website, and see what we have there. And this is the second year that we've done this roundtable, but we've been releasing these state of the title industry reports for what is now the fourth year. And we had over 400 title professionals answer survey questions about their challenges, technology, and their operations. And so those are the things that we are going to be reviewing today. And I will be asking our panelists questions regarding these topics. And quick introduction of who is with me here today. Mary O'Donnell, she is the CEO and president of Westcor Land Title Insurance Company, which is the largest independent underwriter in the United States. She also served as the 5th female president of the American Land Title Association and was named a Housing Wire Woman of Influence this year. I'm also joined by Lindsay Hall Harrison, who is a Florida underwriting counsel at Stewart Title. She is also on the board of directors for the Florida Land Title Association and co-chair of ALTA's PREA Liaison Work Group. And she has an extensive background in real estate law, which makes her a great resource for title agents looking to improve their best practices. I have also had her on our podcast. She's featured on 2 of our episodes. So if you're into podcasts, I encourage you all to check out our Title Talks podcast, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also follow her professional adventures under the LinkedIn hashtag Tales from the Underwriting Desk. We also have Scarlett First joining us today, who is a title agent at Frontier Secured Title Company in Goodland, Kansas. And she works on a very small team of only 2 professionals, but they get a lot of work done and they are incredibly focused on providing the best customer service experience for all types of real estate transactions. So I want to go ahead and get started first and foremost with the biggest challenges. And this year, overall, people said that unexpected delays were their #1 challenge, followed by juggling too many different responsibilities, not enough time to complete tasks, hiring and training new staff, and then followed by educating real estate agents were their top 5. When we desegregated this data based on your job role, leaders in the industry, that's CEOs, owners, and presidents and executives, they mentioned that hiring and training had become their #1 challenge for this year, followed by juggling too many tasks, not enough time, unexpected delays, and then finding new ways to generate business. And it's interesting to see because last year's result, recruiting and training was #3. And cybersecurity and wire fraud were also ranked higher among all respondents. And it definitely hit the top 5, but this year it dropped out completely. And we also noticed in past surveys that generating new business has always been in the top 5 overall responses. But obviously this year we've had unprecedented title activity and increases in volume. So I think this is a pretty clear reflection of that. So my first question is for Scarlett. I wanted to ask you, where do these challenges rank for you as a small title company operation?
Honestly, for us, education is the biggest one. Trying to educate our realtors and our buyers as to what's going on. Being only two people, hiring isn't as high on our list as everything else, but finding employees anywhere is difficult at the best of times. Um, we all juggle, both of us juggle everything, so not having enough time, juggling tasks, and unexpected delays all go hand in hand. Basically, they're all tied in third.
That makes sense. And Mary, what kind of advice would you give to other leaders tackling these challenges?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's interesting in your survey, very much dependent on what you're doing and the market that you're in. Like Scarlett was talking about, training is obviously, very, very significant piece. I think as you saw, or as I see on the screen here, for other companies, that hiring and training is, just really the key right now. Obviously, we're in a market that is very tight on the labor force. But also we're in an industry where, we sort of have a diminishing pool within our current industry. So, I think, I would advise people to, think outside of perhaps the normal resources that they might go to. One of the things I think all companies can do, irrespective of size, and sometimes they don't think they can, is, think about intern programs. Think about, bringing, in my company, we've done intern programs for people coming out of high school. Not just out of college, and actually having them come and work side by side, with the staff that you currently have and learn on the job, like we all probably did. We all probably learned on the job, right? But I think, for a leader, you have to make very determined and deliberate effort to have this as a productive way of growing staff. Otherwise, we're all so busy, you just it's hard to segment the time. I guess I would say look at it as an investment. Don't overcommit yourself, thinking, well, I'm going to do, a 2-hour training once a week for my interns, because it won't happen, right? But give yourself some very defined times and say, hey, I'm going to do lunch from 11:30 to 12:30 once a week with this group. Or I'm going to, go speak at the local high school for their training day. And I think there's great places to go and find new people to bring in the industry, which will help this problem.
Yeah, that's a great point. I often hear, people describe the title industry as a hidden industry. It's something that you sort of fall into, or tricked into is another phrase that I've heard from some professionals, where it's just something that it was very happenstance the way that they got into it. So it definitely seems like a more intentional approach of bringing awareness that this is a potential career path, that you don't necessarily have to have a 4-year college degree to get started in it, and that you do a lot of learning on the job. So it is a great opportunity for a lot of people who are thinking of, or who are young professionals looking for a career path, or people thinking to switch career paths even. I did also want to launch a really quick poll for everyone in the audience. I wanted to get an idea of who is here joining us today. I noticed some people from the mortgage industry, as well as some people from title, a couple of notary signing agents signed up. So I'd like to just get a clearer view of which role you have in the real estate transaction of those who are with us here live today. I'll give you a few minutes to submit your answer there. And if you're other, right now, other's at 15%. So if you're other, go ahead and put in the comments what I maybe missed here on the answers. All right, I'll give you a couple more seconds to put in your answer, and then I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. So let's take a quick look, just so our panelists have an idea of who's with us here today. Oh, a vendor manager. That's a good point. I did not put vendor, so that's Obviously, yeah, that makes sense. So 76% title, 2% mortgage, 2% notary signing agents, 2% real estate agent broker, and then other. And it looks like the others are mostly vendors, so that makes sense. All right, awesome. Great to know. Great to know who our audience is today. So,
That's what Mary was saying on going to the high schools and speak. I actually went to the JAG classes this last week to speak to the students, and I asked them, what is a title agent? They had no clue.
how old were they, did you say?
High school, so
High
the 9th
school.
through 12th.
Yeah, I don't think most people know what a title agent is until they actually get into the home buying process, which your late 20s, 30s, probably for most people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Um,
Scarlett, it's interesting, right? Because you've done what I've done. You go talk to people, and I think the key for our industry is, really looking at the bigger picture of what we do, which is like help people buy homes, right? Because people
Absolutely.
understand that, and I think sometimes it's how we talk about it, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
we're all very technical because we know the technical side of it, but you can get people pretty excited about, hey, you get to participate in helping people buy their homes. And we thought, oh great, well how do I do that? So I think it's
Yep.
important to think about how we talk about our industry to people outside of our industry.
yeah, that's a great point too. I know for other professionals that I've talked to within the industry, being able to describe, those major tasks between protecting the transaction with the work that you do on the title side of things, and then also protecting on the escrow side of things as well. It's really difficult to explain if no one's been through the transaction process yet, but definitely educating people a little bit better on what it is that the industry does as a whole, and then really breaking that down in terms of day-to-day tasks that contribute to that. And so on that note, demographic highlights, I have that here regarding who responded to our website or to our survey. 77% of respondents were female workers in the industry. And the percentage of those working in the industry who are close to retirement age, we've seen this particular segment, 65 and older, grow from last year's respondents from 7.6% to 9.3%. And then we also saw a slight increase in the youngest respondents, ages 18 to 24. That went up from 1.5% to 2.2%. And for 83% of people who responded, they said that they work at an independent title company or law firm. And so I wanted to ask all of you, and maybe we'll start with Mary, what are your thoughts on this composition of the industry? And what do you think we can do? We kind of touched on it a little bit already, but are there any other um, sort of tactics that you would provide for people to provide more opportunities for young professionals to enter the industry?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think the results are not surprising, right? From what we see here, I think we know that, we're seeing part of the industry, aging towards retirement. Somewhat encouraging to see the 1.5 go to 2.2, so that's somewhat encouraging, right? And certainly seeing the predominance of female workers, is certainly something again that we wouldn't find surprising. I think the key is going to be, how do we not only attract new people into the business, a little like we were just talking about, and how we talk about the business and, what we do for a living. And, I'm sure both Scarlett and Lindsay, as you talk to people outside the business, you have a busy day and it's really tiring and it's 6 o'clock and you just want to go home, and then you go and you do a presentation to somebody, and 30 minutes into it, you're like, this is a really cool industry. We get all excited about it right by the time we talk about it. And so I think the more we can give people a breath of not only what we do, but also I think it's a unique industry in the ability to grow your career and really grow into some very significant roles, and very well paid roles, right, around the industry. And whether that's from high school or from college or as a second career. So I think it's important. I know for my company, as we've tried to bring new people in, either through intern programs, I will tell you one of the things that's happened to us is as we've brought people in, they then bring other people in, right? It's amazing. All of a sudden, you hire one person in their 20s, and all of a sudden, their Facebook friends are calling you to say, oh yeah, we'd be interested in doing that, right? So I think the more we can, talk about our industry as something that's, exciting and positive, and it's an area that you can grow in and have very significant careers, which doesn't happen in a lot of industries today. And the independence of thought, why being quick on your feet, being entrepreneurial, so I think it's incumbent on all of us, to get that messaging out there. And then, Scarlett touched on this, is it's one thing to attract them, it's another thing to retain them, right? So I think we've got to have a real focus on, how do you retain, the new young talent coming into the business? And we have to recognize that, perhaps their goals may be different than, perhaps a generation ago or 2 generations ago. And, we certainly find, that balance of, something meaningful and something that, has social impact is very important to a lot of the generations coming in. So I think highlighting, and it's one of the reasons that in my time, we started the ALTA Good Deeds Foundation, which PropLogix has been wonderful to support with us, is really not only because our industry does give back, but to make sure that story goes out to prospective employees who want to join us, to know we're an industry that's a great career, you've got a great path, but the industry gives back. And I think that's really important to the new generation.
And Lindsay, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the one thing that is really interesting about that increase in the younger age demographic there is that the pandemic probably had a big effect on that. I know that a few title agents that I work with closely hired new people in the last 18 months who used to be in retail or were in food service, restaurant servers. And so they're customer oriented people, but the pandemic obviously changed the course of their careers and maybe gave them pause to go, well, I can't work in a restaurant right now, but I still need to have a job. One young woman that I can think of, she's turning out to be an amazing agent. And she was a server in a restaurant for several years coming out of undergrad. And that she thought was probably going to propel her into management within the restaurant industry. But her boyfriend was actually a real estate agent. And so he found out about an opening in the title agent's office and said, maybe you should look at this as an opportunity. So now she is fully embedded in the title agent's office. She's looking at becoming a licensed title agent here in Florida. I'm encouraging her to get involved in the Land Title Association and to start to really propel her career forward. So I think that's one thing that we really have to do. And also that does really highly reflect that 77% of the women are in the demographic who are in this industry. You look at who are the employees, the boots on the ground, who are, handling the processing, handling the escrow, doing the closing work. But then as the numbers, you get to higher levels of management within companies and you look at the executive level. I mean, Mary is a wonderful exception to honestly the rule, which is it's a very male dominated, top heavy, industry. So how do we find ways to not only bring new people into the industry, but then to encourage them to stay and give them opportunities to rise up? I think one of the most important things that we can absolutely do is to, as land title associations around the country, is to encourage new members, perhaps give out scholarships to the processors, to the escrow agents, the people who don't normally get to come to the conventions, who don't normally get to be a part of the conversations in person. Bring them into the conversation, let them be, have the FaceTime with people to realize that this is really a career where you can actually rise all the way to the top. I'm just like Scarlett and Mary, and I go out and talk to law students and do career days and talk to people about careers in title insurance. And the first, what is this and what do you do? And I don't understand anything about this. But when we get past the what is my job, I point out to them that there is so much possibility in this industry, and you don't have to have a college degree to start out. You really can come out with a diploma from high school and you can have a lifelong successful career. There's no requirement to actually have a really expensive education behind you to be successful. You can be a small business owner. You can run your own company. You can be a leader within a national land title association. There is no requirement for you to have to be overly educated to do this job. But it's really great when we get people with all levels of experience and knowledge who want to come into this industry and join us.
And Scarlett, you've already mentioned some of the things that you're doing in terms of educating people about the industry. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we move on?
The biggest thing I think is just to talk. When you ask a kid what they want to be, they say, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a police officer. They have no clue our industry exists. The more we can stand on the roof and shout about it, the more diversified our industry is going to get. I had 3 male students at high school say, well, when we graduate, can we come intern with you? I said, absolutely, come look me up. I would love that. It's all about being vocal. And I don't think there's enough vocal people in our industry. A lot of people get scared to get in front of the camera or in front of the class, or they're
Yeah.
too busy.
Yeah, I think the too busy part might be a big part of that as well, especially right now. And that's a great segue actually into our next slide, which is about balancing a bigger workload. We know that there's been explosive growth in terms of title volume from 2020 and 2021 as well. We asked people, how many closings they're handling each month. Our largest percentage, about 18%, said that they're handling somewhere between 21 to 30 closings a month. When we desegregated that data based on if you're like working at a law firm or a title company, we saw that in law firms, they're doing slightly less closings. 25% was 6 to 10, but overall, it's pretty reflective, I think, of what you would expect to see from the past year. And when we asked people how they're handling this demand, many people said that they were hiring and training more staff. Others said that they were using more mobile and remote notaries. Some mentioned updating their software applications with more automation and AI. And then others just said that they're working harder, doing more, basically. So I did want to ask everyone here today, we've heard a lot about in other industries, burnout being a big issue. And I wanted to get some feedback from those of you with us here today if you've felt burnout at all at doing the title work that you do. So go ahead and let me know real quick. Yes, no, not sure, or if you haven't even had time to think about it, really. I'll give everyone a few more seconds to add their answer. So far, it looks like the yeses are winning. And Kathy makes an interesting point here. She commented that burnout for me is caused by the technology or delays due to solving title issues, which is an interesting point, how sometimes a tool that is meant to help you do your job better can sometimes be a hindrance, especially if you have to be trained on it. So overall, looks like 45% of you said that yes, you have been experiencing some burnout this year. 35% no, 3% not sure, and 16% you haven't even had time to think about it. Do you guys have any comments on those results at all?
Amanda, I will say that, of course, as underwriting counsel, I spend my days being frontline talking to title agents about what it is that they're experiencing in the field and how their lives are going. And a lot of time I joke that, part of my job is to help as a glorified help desk, and the other part of my job is therapist. And so a lot of the work that our agents are doing is tremendous. They have so much on their plates. They're expected to know so much, not just about how to do their own jobs, but about the current state of the industry and new technology that's flying at them, and software updates and integrations, and a tremendous amount of information that is constantly whizzing at them. And so I say this over and over again, our title agents in this country are the most amazing people who are so hardworking and really are just experts. And I'm always incredibly proud to work with these group of people, because they really do such an amazing job of keeping our industry moving forward.
And we've touched on this next topic a little bit already in terms of recruiting and training, the diversity aspect of that. But I want to dive into that a little bit more. As many of you probably know, you've heard that the future home buyer is changing. There is a projection from the Urban Institute that between 2020 and 2040, 70% of new home owners will be Latino. And so I wanted to ask all of you, or I wanted to ask you, Lindsay, first, how do we build a workforce that reflects the community title agents serve? And what sort of what sort of resources should companies be leveraging to find and train talent?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that we need to meet people where they're at, and we need to recognize that, the generation of Aunt Pam bringing the nephews and the nieces into our industry because that's their first summer job, that's going by the wayside. That's not as common anymore, but we also have to do a better job of actually bringing people into the offices who speak the languages and reflect the diversity of the buyers and sellers who are sitting in front of them. And so, one thing that we have to recognize is that our diversity of population of people who are buying homes is changing. But for a lot of people in this country, home ownership is still not on the table for them, and it's not a possibility. So it's really hard to talk about diversity and bringing in different communities to our industry when there's a lot of people in those groups of populations who home ownership isn't part of the discussion. So how do we teach somebody about title insurance and about what it is we do if people in their own community are not buying homes? So we have to really do an educational push to say, if here's something that we do, it's really important. Here's how you can reflect your community, and here's how you can maybe engage your community. Teach your relatives, teach your neighbors about buying a home, and you can be part of the process. Here in Florida, the Land Title Association, we have put together a website, Florida Runs on Title Insurance, .com, which the website finds a new way to help people who are looking for jobs. We match people by personality types. And so if you go to the website, you can put in, you can click on a button that says I'm outgoing, or I'm a problem solver, I'm, independent. And those types of personality traits will then lead you down to job descriptions of the type of roles and careers you could have in title insurance. Because if we put a job posting out there for a processor or an escrow agent or a closer or an examiner, people are going to go, I don't understand what that means. But if you, explain a role, somebody who is really detail oriented and can sit and examine documents and really can find where the problems are, well, that's a title examiner. So how do we bring new people in? We have to reframe the discussion around meeting people where they're at.
And Mary, from your perspective as a woman in a leadership role, what is needed to provide career opportunities for women and minorities in the industry?
Yeah, thank you. And I couldn't agree more with Lindsay on just one comment before I even comment on that is we've got to think about how do we engage home buyers who aren't part of the process right now. And there is a huge community everywhere around the country that are not yet participating, in the home ownership dream. And so partnering with local action groups, partnering with our realtors, partnering with our lenders to teach people how to become homeowners is, to me, the first step in bringing more diversity into our own business. So it does reflect what the home buying community should be. On the ability to grow and have more opportunity, Lindsay alluded to this before. It is an industry very dominated by women in a lot of roles, but then you don't see that as much when you get to sort of what they call the C-suite roles, right? And we've got to talk about why is that, right? And part of it, I think we've got to also look at the mix of companies, right? I know you guys have done part of this as part of your surveying, is, when we think about agents, we talk about how many women are in the business, but how many of those businesses are actually female owned, right? And I think looking at that and figuring that out, I think as a woman, in that kind of a role, I think part of it is on us. Quite frankly, part of us is we have to acknowledge that we have a right to be in these roles, right? And, I think as women, we're probably our own worst critics sometimes, right? As, we're always striving to juggle everything and we have to be perfect at everything because, it's just who we are, right? And I think it's important that we realize that there is just a there's a right to have a seat at the table, but frankly, sometimes you just got to ask for it, right? I don't think we're as good at that sometimes, whether it's from a female perspective or a minority perspective. I think sometimes we think, well, people will notice, and then eventually we'll get there, right? And sometimes our male counterparts don't have that restriction. They feel like they should go ask. So I encourage women and minorities who want to aspire into that C-suite role to be vocal. Scarlett talked about vocal just generally in our business. Well, be vocal about your career, and I'm not saying go demand it, but you've earned the right, so go talk about it, right? And as women, we're not always as good at that, I think. I think also we need to make sure that we have a good mentor program, and that we're reaching across the industry to show people that what is possible, but also mentoring them to get there, and being available and having a community. We're a great title community, so we need to utilize that more as far as mentoring people, bringing diversity. I know in our company, one of the things we try and do is, and I know it's difficult, especially in a smaller agency, but just moving people around and letting them try out new jobs and new ideas, and having them sit in on meetings. That somebody did it for me early in my career. I used to sit in on meetings and I think, I have no idea why I'm sitting here. I don't even really know what they're talking about, and I'd feel like I'm probably shouldn't be in this meeting. But now I look back and I learned a ton from it. So I think it is on the job, but I think we have to be, again, deliberate in making sure that we're giving people the visibility into what's available to them. And for a lot of our industry, because we're just so busy, sometimes it's just happenstance. You find out somebody has this ability, and you go, oh wow, I didn't know that, we should give them that chance, right? So I think Scarlett was spot on. We need to talk about it more. We need to deliberately engage with people about what is it they want to do. And sometimes they're going to say, I don't have a clue. I don't know what I want. I don't know what all that's about. So showing them the road and the path that can take them there, and just really being vocal about where you want to get to, and encouraging diversity by encouraging home ownership in a more diverse manner, I think is going to be critical for our business.
Yeah, I would agree with turning inward to your company, seeing, who has what kind of talents that might be hidden that you're not aware of. I started off as a property analyst at PropLogix, and I've always enjoyed researching and writing. And I really, I had the opportunity to showcase my talent as a writer for one of our blog articles. And Lindsay, who is in our marketing department, and was the head of the department at the time, she saw, in me that talent that she thought would be able to grow and really help with the company. So regardless of what industry you're working in, I think that's a great point, Mary, where sometimes companies don't notice the talent that they already have, and it just takes giving that person the opportunity to demonstrate that they have the ability to really help carry your company to the next level. That's really important. So next up, we have technology in the title industry. We've asked each year, a little bit about the title production software that people use. 96.6% of companies use some sort of title production software. And some of the most popular ones are SoftPro, Qualia, Resware, Closer's Choice, and DoubleTime. I will note too, I didn't mention this earlier, in terms of region, because we are a Florida-based company, many of our respondents are from the Florida area. So your region might see, I think, a slightly different kind of spread of these software vendor providers. But I did want to ask Scarlett about this, in terms of software updates. You mentioned that you recently switched over to a new software provider. Can you talk a little bit about that experience, why you made that decision?
Well, originally we had Streamline. I don't know how many people are familiar with the old Streamline system, but it wasn't as user-friendly as we had hoped. And with Qualia, it just allowed so much more. We were able to track our files so much better. We were able to stay on top of all of our closings. And it was just such an upgrade. It'll also eventually allow us to do like the RON closings and a lot of the digital side that we aren't currently allowed to do out here because our registers don't accept that. We're trying to be forward thinking where we're at and get ahead of the game. So when all of that comes down the pipeline, we're like, hey, we can do that. Come see us. So we're trying to implement a whole bunch of new things besides Qualia to really help get the edge on the market out here.
And, Ron, it's obviously a really big topic of discussion since COVID-19. A lot of people have really turned to experimenting with Ron or e-closing solutions. 62% of our respondents said that they added some sort of Ron or e-closing solution during the past year or two. And there was another survey that came out from ALTA that Ron is most prevalent in Florida, Texas, and Virginia, but there's also been some trends, upward trends in the Midwestern states as well. I know there hasn't been much movement on the Secure Notarization Act. So, for Scarlett and other people out in areas where it's not been accepted nationwide, there's still the problem of being able to offer that within your operations. But there's also been some other impressive, stats as well that we've seen, like the 547% increase in 2020. But there's also been some criticism about that as well. Some people have said, when they've looked at their overall number of transactions, Ron still makes up a very, very small percentage. So I'm curious to know from Mary, I'd like to ask you first, there's still obviously a lot of room for growth for Ron. And we know that there's also some lender hesitancy about adopting Ron as well, which is what I hear a lot of people point to on the title side when they, are hesitant to also adopt it themselves. They're looking for the mortgage lender to move on it. So what do you think will really move the needle on Ron in the future?
Yeah, I think you're spot on, right? It's a mixture of things. I mean, there certainly is some lender issues, right? And some of that is hesitancy, but some of it's just they're not wired yet for it, right? They may not have their own eVault solution. They may not have set up an eVault with Freddie and Fannie, which is what they need to be able to sell their loans on the secondary. And so you end up with this hybrid of, well, I have to have a wet sign note, but I can use Ron for everything else. And I think at that point you end up with, from a title agent's perspective, you're like, if I've got to send this out to get it signed anyway, it's almost more work for me to do both, right? To do this true hybrid. So I might as well just, get them signed, right? I think it's going to involve every participant in the transaction, as well as the secondary, right? I think Fannie and Freddie can, and they have been leading on it, but they need to continue to show leadership in this area. So that the lender has more options as well, because that's very often, the issue is on the lender side because of the eVault issue. And then I think there is, some question hesitancy on the customer side, right? I mean, I think Ron will, will have a place. It does have a place. It's like any technology in our business. I'm not going to date myself as badly as I could, but you think about things that, have added over the years and, you now they're like everyday part of what we do, but they weren't for quite a while. And, they were used only sporadically. And, I think, Lindsay and Scarlett alluded to this. I think it's a great challenge for agents because they're bombarded by technology. And I was talking to one yesterday and they said, probably have 9 different portals I have to go into to just get a closing done. And, frankly, it'd be easier if I just did it old school because it takes me longer to do it the way it's done. So I think getting some cohesiveness around the technology will also help in terms of adoption. And then I think knowing who your customer is, I think, frankly, a first-time home buyer is very different from somebody who's done 5 closings, right? And, we always think about sort of the millennial buyer and, they'll want everything remote, they'll want everything digital and all of those good things. And yet I've talked to some in that arena and they said, well, not really. I kind of want an experience because it's like going to be really my first time and I want to feel something other than just sitting in my slippers, clicking on something. So I think we've just got to know the customer, know when it's going to work. Work with our lenders. As an industry, we need to continue our work with Freddie and Fannie. We definitely need to continue the lobbying on SAFE Act and the national standards. I think that's all very, very critical. But I think as an industry, certainly COVID helped drive some of that 500% increase. But it's interesting. I talk to our agents, and very often it's agents in perhaps areas where somebody has to drive an hour to come and do a closing because it's a more of a remote area, where remote online could probably have the biggest impact.
Yeah, I think knowing your customer is a really great point. I've had a couple of conversations with people who have done a remote online notarization transaction on the consumer side. And for people who have done it, was a refinance for one particular interview I did, and the couple loved it. They loved the convenience of it. They'd already been through the first time home buyer experience. So it wasn't something like they didn't feel like they were missing out on anything like that. And the husband was also a real estate investor. And so he made the comment that he was like, I will never use any other, way of closing again. I don't ever want to have to go into a title company again to close on a home if this is available. So I think to the point about, talking about what the title industry does, I think there's also a good opportunity to talk about this other choice that consumers have. And really, it's just a matter of offering more choices to consumers, and that could never be a bad thing, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Lindsay, I wanted to ask you if you could give some clarity on why there are still some legal concerns around RON, attorney states, recording district acceptance, legal enforceability. These are all things that I've heard people mention in terms of like the legality of it. So can you kind of go into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I do want to touch on one thing that Mary was saying about user access. I'm here in Florida, and of course, Florida has a really heavy amount of foreign investor clients who buy and sell real estate in Florida. And so, I will just note that one of the frustrations that I have heard repeatedly about the launch and the growth of RON is that it doesn't fully accommodate for foreign buyers and investors because the rules do not permit for a non-US citizen in many cases to be able to actually execute documents under Florida's RON statute, and that is similar for other states as well. So, National Acceptance to Secure Notarization Act, which ALTA has been backing very strongly and has been working very hard with legislators to try and get it passed, would solve a lot of our problems. Not totally, but it would get us to a national level of acceptance with minimum standards, which is something that's extremely important. It would definitely help Scarlett's business to give her an opportunity to be able to reach out to those customers, especially if she is dealing with rural farm owners who are trying to sell and buy property. To be able to do that where they don't have to travel several miles or, through the snow in the wintertime to be able to buy and sell their property, that would be a real convenience for them. A lot of the legal issues that really are surrounding RON still being functional actually has a lot to do with custodial issues. How the individual RON providers hold those documents in their own individual vaults, how those documents get held by the lenders. There are different timing requirements statutorily between what a lender must do and how long they have to hold documents versus how long the state statutes for each of the notary providers have to hold documents. So that does create a conflict of laws right there over custodial options to hold the documents. It also causes a problem for title agents because are they expected to hold on to these copies themselves? How does somebody get access to, mom has a power of attorney that was executed using a RON, but now mom is incapacitated in a nursing home, and she's in a situation where she can't remember her username and password to log in to get a copy of that document. So how does her daughter, who now needs to use that POA in order to be able to sell mom's house, how does she get a copy of that document? A lot of states' laws say that those documents can't be released to anybody other than the individual who actually did the signing. In some states, you actually have 3 states, Missouri, Illinois, and Wyoming, where you need a court order or a subpoena to get access to those documents. So how does that tie up and lengthen the closing transaction if a power of attorney really is the document that's being held up because a RON signer was used? I really think a conflict of laws is really the main issue that we're dealing with at this point. If we could get onto a national set of minimum standards, we would be in a much better place for being able to move forward. But I will also say that, the recording offices around the country also have to do their own due diligence to get themselves up and ready for technology to be able to accept electronic recordings. and to be able to have electronic access to the records. So there's a lot of things in play to be able to be on the same page. You know, there are many counties around the country that still do not have access to e-recording. So it's going to be really hard to have a remote online notarized document printed out and then taken over to a recording office and have it accepted as a document that would be part of a recorded filing, when an electronic document would be the preference. So, you know, the technology is here, but we're just waiting. We're waiting for the processes to catch up, and ultimately, it's the government that really, you know, the multiple layers of government, which are kind of holding up the ingenuity that we have.
Actually, we still have several counties here that require a wet signature. We have to physically drive it or mail it in because they won't accept anything. They're not online. We're lucky we can use the computer just to print out the documents that we need for our searches.
Yeah, and the fallout of the pandemic is a lot of recording offices have not reopened their doors to in-person recordings, or they've got extremely limited hours, making it very difficult for people to actually get into the recording office to be able to submit documents.
Mm-hmm. A lot of it was done by appointment only. You had to call in and schedule it next week if you're lucky.
So next up, I have title production outsourcing. And this is a question that we ask every year because obviously it's very relevant to what we do, the services that we provide for our clients. And we wanted to know what types of things title agents are outsourcing. 83% said municipal lien searches, which was the highest amount, 75% utility searches, 73% title searches, 71% tax information, and 59% UCC searches. Those were the top outsourced items. I wanted to ask all of the panelists, what should title professionals consider when outsourcing?
We're generally the people that get outsourced too. We have only a couple counties online. So all of those companies reach out to us and say, hey, can you go find this for us? So we're a boots on the ground kind of company. We don't get to outsource much.
Yeah, I know a few states are like that too, where you have to do a lot of, in-person record searches. So it's difficult for companies like us to offer that sort of alleviation. So that's obviously a really good point. And what about you, Lindsay? What would you say people should consider before outsourcing?
Just doing your due diligence with the vendors you're working with. You know, there are a lot of really highly reputable local mom and pop type of businesses who are regional, but you want to make sure that you are dealing with reputable companies who are following ALTA best practices in terms of their standards for maintaining NPPI, keeping documents confidential, and making sure that they have their own internal document, data privacy standards, because we are ultimately dealing with confidential other people's information.
And Mary, what would your comments be on that?
I'd agree with, Lindsay, that you should definitely have to know your vendor. I think you should also think about how does it work within your system and within your workflow. If you're working with a company, for instance, like PropLogic, you've got a consistency of workflow across counties if you're doing multiple county work, for instance, right? So, I think knowing your vendor, realizing that, actually taking some of these costs and making them variable as opposed to, an internal fixed cost is probably good for your business. If you can have a strength of reliance on a really strong vendor, if you can manage that vendor across multiple counties, that's certainly going to help you in terms of workflow margin and how you run your business.
And next, I want to talk a little bit about post-closing. I had a conversation with you, Lindsay, about this issue earlier, and we like to ask people a little bit about, what kind of issues they run into as they're doing pre-closing tasks that should have been, should have been addressed post-closing in the previous transaction. And so one of the questions we ask people is, when was the last time you ran into an issue with a mortgage satisfaction or lien release recording in the last 3 months? And 43% said that they had some sort of issue within the last 3 months. But also only 50% said that they always check the public record for lien releases, mortgage satisfactions, and deeds of reconveyance. And when we asked when they do this, most said that they do it when they are issuing their title policies or typing their title policy. One statistic that really stood out to me is that 9% said that they have no standard process as far as tracking these trailing documents. So I wanted to start first with you, Scarlett, regarding, trailing documents. If they aren't officially recorded in at the time of issuing your policies, how do you handle follow-up with your recording jurisdictions?
We actually ran into the situation where we were trying to get a mortgage released. It took almost a year, and we actually had to file suit against the company just to get them to send the piece of paper to release it. We were in constant contact, trying, not really harassing, but going, come on, guys, we gotta keep going here. We gotta keep this moving. We're waiting on you. Trying to keep our underwriters and everybody in the loop as to what's going on, but essentially, until you can get that released, it's a problem. I mean, we just keep on it. And out here, you just have to go and drive and check the records and see where you're at. And hopefully they'll get it to you eventually.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of constraints because of how your recording jurisdictions are set up to not be able to accept any sort of e-recording or very little access online. So that seems like a huge pain point for you. Mary, what sort of expectations do underwriters have regarding trailing documents when working with their title agents?
Yeah, I think, it probably varies a little by underwriter, and so you probably definitely want to, talk to your individual underwriters about how they, think about this area. I think sometimes it may differentiate whether the transaction you're doing is a refinance or it's a purchase, because that may be slightly different. And, there are some technologies that, we might utilize, depending on the underwriter, in a refinance transaction that maybe the trailing doc isn't as important. But I would say this, as underwriters, we get a significant amount of communication coming from lenders around this issue. When, let's say, especially, we're in a great market right now, so, you don't hear it as much, but you move into a default market and it becomes an enormous issue. We get into a default market. I mean, you can only imagine the number of transactions that we'll hear about, where they're trying to do a foreclosure or they're trying to do a judicial sale, and there are outstanding mortgages sitting there. So it's tough. And Scarlett alluded to something. As a title agent, if you can put a process in place where you can routinely update to try and find these things, it may seem like a total pain at this point. But believe me, it's a way bigger pain when it's 2 years from now and you have to go and track these down, and the lender's been bought by another lender, and you've got to go through 900 different things to try and get it, and everybody's screaming at you because you're now their problem, type of thing, right? So I would say, as an underwriter, we would say to our agents, it may seem like a difficult process, but if you can put a process in place, and obviously it's easier in electronic counties than it is in non-electronic counties. There are outsources, right? There are people who will provide lien release tracking as an outsource and as a business. And that may be something you want to think about, because the ultimate cost to you may end up being larger if you have to start tracking these things down, especially in the default scenario.
And Lindsay, I've heard some agents mention mutual indemnification as a reason for not worrying about following up on some instruments listed in the title commitment. Can you explain why that's a dangerous mentality?
Yeah, sure. So mutual indemnification really is a tacit agreement between the underwriters that, since there was a prior insured policy covering certain things, that we can go forward from that prior policy and we can kind of ignore some of those issues. They all do fall under certain requirements, and they have to be really specific. And I think one of the biggest dangers is that there's an assumption that if there was a prior policy, almost anything can be excused. And so I have seen this come up before, where agents will go, oh, well, there's a prior policy, we don't have to worry about that. But it turns out that, the legal description is completely wrong, or there's a missing grantor on the deed who didn't sign. An indemnification agreement is not going to, an indemnification agreement isn't going to cover that. An indemnification letter from the prior underwriter isn't even going to cover that. Those are title issues that actually have to be cleared. So, when we're looking at that, you also have to think about the other side of it, which is that you really do ultimately want to have a clean record going forward. And so to do that, you need to make sure that the documents that should be in the record are there. And it's not just for, the good of the community and the good of the record, but some of these problems don't arise until 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years down the road, when all of a sudden there's a big problem on title and there's nothing in the record to support whatever it is that we're trying to find. And the grantors are deceased at that point. The probate records maybe that were held in the courthouse have been long shredded and don't exist anymore. And so we're trying to track down ghosts because we don't have anything to work from. So it really is important that as many things on the title agent's checklist as there are that need to get done, that the post-closing issues don't get forgotten about just because you're too busy. I understand, that once the deal is done and done and dusted, you need to move on to the next deal, and that's unfortunately, that's just the nature of our business. But we can't forget about the stuff that still has to be cleaned up, because it may come back as an indemnification request from a future title agent who's looking backwards and trying to fix problems. But also just because these things do actually affect our buyers and our insured parties going forward.
It looks like we lost Mary, but hopefully she'll be able to reconnect again. I wanted to finish with predictions for 2022. What are some of the things that you are anticipating for the next year? Let's start with you, Scarlett.
I think, gosh, I hope we get back to being able to see people and go out. That's my biggest prediction, hope, biggest thing we can hope for right now. I think that out here, there's not a whole lot of change. So it's hard to predict where the market goes when it's kind of the same market. We don't have the big commercial deals versus what like Lindsay would have. So, but hopefully.
And Lindsay, what are your thoughts for 2022 looking forward?
Well, I know that, here in Florida, we have an extremely lucky market of buyers and sellers who are really having, on the commercial end, on the residential end, who are having, a boom year. Prices on real estate down here are ridiculous. And so it's a great problem to have, but you talk to everyone who goes, well, my house price has doubled in 3 years, but I can't move because I can't sell my house because I can't afford to buy anything new. So, we are seeing that reflected in the number of home listings going up, and that it is starting to slow down because people are in that crunch, which is, gosh, it would be really great to sell my house for a lot of money, but where am I going to go? It's so I'm hopeful that the market is going to continue to be strong, and that we as the title industry are going to continue to be busy. I don't see anything that indicates otherwise, but I hope that technology also helps us to catch up in certain respects. It would be great if Scarlett was able to e-record. I think that's a really important thing. So there's a lot of advocacy that everybody who is listening can do at their local level with their local land title associations, to advocate at their state level to make sure that the funding is put into place to give these counties the electronic recording and the land management software to be able to actually handle electronic documents. So it sounds like a crazy thing to put in a spiel about lobbying and your legislators, but if you want to see change at the local level on certain things, that's where it needs to come from. So activate your local land title association to get involved, and to make sure that you are getting the change you need. Other than that, I just hope for a year where we get back outside and we're hugging our friends, and we are able to go on vacations again, and all of the great things that hopefully are coming for us.
We have a few minutes left. I want to go ahead and open it up for questions before we finish up the session today. I have a question here from Melinda, and she's wondering what your thoughts are on the foreclosure market.
Well, Florida has always, full disclosure, back when I came out of law school, I was a foreclosure attorney handling foreclosure representation for lenders. So that was like 2010, 11, 12. It was the Wild West down here in Florida, and that was not something that I hope that we ever have to repeat. I think that foreclosures are going to continue to just be a reality because they always have been. You know, there's always going to be a small percentage of the population that for whatever reason are unable to pay their mortgage, and the lender is going to need to recover their asset and their investment in order to be able to pay off their debt. I don't think that I see a significant uptick in the foreclosure market anytime soon. It looks like the economy has managed to stabilize itself and people are returning to work and you know, so and so forth. But I think it's probably going to remain steady for the time being.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people were concerned with all the people in forbearance, but the numbers I've seen seem pretty good so far. People are exiting forbearance, and it seems like they're able to get on a plan with their lender to, you know, mitigate foreclosure proceedings. So that's been really good. But like you said, yeah, there will always be foreclosures happening. If there aren't any other questions, I'll give you guys a couple more seconds if anyone wants to get in a last minute question. Um, I just want to say thank you to our panelists. Thanks to Mary, even though we lost you at the end there. I appreciate everyone who came here today. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you found some really valuable insight from all of this. Just to reiterate, I will be sending out an email after this with the recording for you to watch later if you'd like to share with your colleagues, so please do that. And without any other questions, it looks like we are good for the session. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.